Buonasera a tutti. Good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners. Also, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past video interviews. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo. Grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. What happens when Renaissance epic poetry leaves the page and begins to sing? What if the knights of Charlemagne had never left us, but simply changed stages? In this episode of the Italian Radio Hour, we travel from Renaissance course to Sicilian puppet theaters, from the Apennine Mountains to immigrant New York, guided by the luminous scholarship of Joanne Cavallo of Columbia University. Through the poetry of Matteo Maria Boiardo, Ludovico Ariosto, and Torquato Tasso, we discover how epic stories of love, madness, betrayal, and redemption still live, not as relics, but as voices carried by maggerini and pupari. From the handwritten scripts of Sicilian puppeteer Agrippino Manteo in the early 20th century, New York, to the vibrant Maggio performances of today, this conversation reminds us that culture survives through passion, community, and storytelling. Epic is not past, it is memory in motion. It is tradition that breathes and is still alive. So don't go anywhere, we'll be right back. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring, in person or online, to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at istitutomondoitaliano.org. Professor Cavallo, welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much. The introduction was so beautiful. I don't know what I have to add. You said it all.
We have 45 minutes. I'm sure you will be able to feel for our listeners and also for my own personal knowledge, because you encapsulate so much of something that I look still with childhood eyes, which is, the puppet tradition. But I think we might want to step back and talk a little bit about your first encounter with the epic Maggio. Happened almost by accident in Scandiano. Can you take us back to that moment?
Yes, gladly. In fact, my encounter with the Maggio in the north of Italy and with puppet theater in the south of Italy both came about almost by accident. I say serendipitously. It could be destiny. But what happened was I was directing a summer program for Columbia in Scandiano in the province of Reggio Emilia. And one of the host fathers of our students said, those epics that you teach inside of the castle of Matteo Maria Boiardo are actually still performed just about an hour away in our Apennine Mountains. And so when he saw that, I was very excited. The next Sunday, he and his wife drove, myself and my two young children to a very small town in the Apennines in the province of Modena, behind a church built in the Middle Ages, to see a Maggio epico, this epic Maggio. And at the time, it did not show one of the Renaissance epics that I had been studying or teaching, but it was a performance of the Odyssey. So going back to Greek epic. And I was amazed that the local inhabitants from the mountain were following with such passion the journey of Odysseus as he returned home to Ithaca and fought with the suitors to reclaim his rightful role as the ruler and as the husband and father. And they would follow along with the libretto and watch the action. So it was a form of folk opera, but always with the same, basically the same melody. And it then stays in your head for hours and hours. So that was my first encounter. And then I returned many, many times.
Do you know if they're still doing it by chance? So that I will make sure to schedule a visit of those areas around that time.
every summer, and it is always on a Sunday afternoon in different mountain towns of the Tuscan Emilian Apennines. So there are theater companies from both Tuscany and Emilia who have been carrying out this tradition for it. It's unclear how far it goes back. There are references to it in documents from the 1700s. Some scholars say, well, that quartina verse form was around in the Renaissance, and many link it back to pre-Christian, or if you want to say pagan, rituals and celebrations of spring. Because in the Maggio, it's, say, good versus bad, evil or evil versus good, and the winter and the spring, death, life, rebirth, very strong emotions, strong themes, and almost always at the end of the Maggio, there's a sense of justice winning out, even though there have been sacrifices and many injustices along the way, a sense of community, hope, and the companies come together and sing a final verse at the end, really acknowledging the sense of community. So, for example, one of the companies says, "Dear public, excuse our errors. We are not true actors. We are just folks like you, just folks like you." And then it brings everyone, the audience and the performers, into the same space as a community going forward.
So how did seeing these stories sung in the Apennines change or might have changed the way that you read now Boiardo and Ariosto?
Well, I think it changed the direction of my research because initially, when I had seen the Maggio performances and the puppet performances, I thought it was a fun hobby to film them, to interview the maggerini, the puppeteers, something that just accompanied my main research, which was always the literary criticism, the interpretations of the epics. But within a short time, I realized what really fascinated me was how these popular traditions interpreted creatively the epics. So I went from interpreting the epics directly to taking a step back and interpreting how these popular traditions were interpreting them. So my research in the past, 20 or so years has been more focused on the ways that the Epic Maggio and Sicilian puppet theater create meaning through epic stories and through their adaptations, through their modifications, elaborations of the story. It's a living tradition because even in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, there's not one authoritative, definitive version. Each poet, each even storyteller, whether an accomplished poet writing in ottava rima in the court or a storyteller on the street, they are going to put their own worldview, their own aesthetic, their own moral code into the way that they tell the story. And so what the Maggio companies and what the puppeteers are doing is what was done in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, which is a continuous re-elaboration of stories in which the main characters are known to everyone and they become household names, friends, so also enemies. If you think of the evil Gano, the one everyone loves to hate. And it's a shared universe. It's a fictitious universe, but it's one that the community shares and that continues to evolve.
So it looks like there is indeed this nice synergy of cultural preservation, but on the other hand, moving them along our lives so that anyone can relate to that because they will indeed represent the values, kind of the current values where that story has been set. So what happens when written poem like Orlando Innamorato becomes a live performance?
Oh, there's so many angles that can be taken from the poem. At first, I think if you see it as a puppet performance, my first reaction was how maybe reduced it was because the poetry wasn't there. And then getting used to the format, I began to see and appreciate actually what was there. And it's not a static reenactment. It is always a way of molding stories in order to very often speak of contemporary matters. There's one scene, and I always love to speak out about Boiardo, but the example that just came to my mind is from Ariosto, which is when Astolfo goes on to the moon. And he is there in order to recuperate the wits that Orlando has lost when he went crazy out of jealousy, having been in love with Orlando and realized she had chosen someone else over him. And in Ariosto's mind, everything that is lost on Earth ends up at the moon. So the moon is this cosmic junkyard with everything's been lost, the promises of rulers, the tears of lovers, flattery, kingdoms. And there is Orlando's mind, since he has gone out of his mind. And at that moment, the puppeteer Giacomo Cuticchio and Giacomo Cuticchio, the son of Mimmo Cuticchio, who was performing it, had Astolfo breathe in, inhale some of his own mind as well, because he had lost part of it. And when he, this very transcendent scene on the moon with blue lights, the candlelight, very mystical, he stops and says, if only men could realize all of the harm that they do to each other on this earth through aggression, through wars, we could live in peace. And it's something that's not in Ariosto, but that just everyone held their breath when in the performance because it really resonated. Just to stop a moment on the moon from the vantage point outside the earth and to think back not just of the story itself of Orlando and Rinaldo and Angelica, but to think of our collective lives. It was, I think, a powerful moment.
Well, you indeed transported us to an experience of, obviously having read Ariosto in school, but kind of getting the chills from when you were telling us, it witnesses Orlando's madness in a Sicilian puppet theater. That must have been a priceless experience for everyone. And so in today's digital age, what role does orality, still play in your opinion?
Thank goodness it exists, because if everything or if 90% of our lives is digital, I think we can forget the richness of direct contact, of being in a live theater, whether it's the Maggio or whether it's Sicilian puppet theater, and to be transported either by the wooden puppets with rods or by the actors in their costumes with swords and shields and helmets. And I think imagination is so vital, but digital is one way, but the real contact of the human voice or the object with a human voice transmitting, I think the puppeteer transmits his or sometimes her soul into the puppets. And that experience of live performance should not be lost because it's so precious. It's what we have as humans in order to connect on an emotional level directly.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about Sicilian puppet theater and the diaspora. I have with me the Sicilian puppet theater of Agrippino Manteo, which is a highly recommended reading. In your book on Agrippino Manteo, you reconstruct the migration of Sicilian puppet theater to New York. Why is this story so important for Italian-American cultural history?
I think it's important for Italian American cultural history, but also for Italian history
Amy. Hmm.
and the
Yes.
history of puppet theater, because Agrippino Manteo preserved his scripts, which were various sets of scripts. And it turns out that this opens up a world that is otherwise hidden to us. There really aren't any cases of publicly available scripts. I mean, you could go to a museum in Italy and sit in the archives and read through a script. So it's not that there are no other scripts, but I think this is the most elaborate, complete example of scripts that are very elaborate, very detailed. The Catania tradition was more detailed in its scripts than the Palermo tradition, which had more improvisation. And Agrippino Manteo's scripts have very specific dialogues. They are divided into three acts, and then each act is divided into scenes. There is quite an incredible amount of poetry in the 330 evenings. I think, and I wrote an article on this, and now I'm blanking out, but I think there could have been 1,000 lines of poetry, something quite unexpected. And it means that this puppeteer from the province of Catania went first to Argentina. He established a puppet theater there in the early 1900s. By 1919, he was in New York. He opened his theater by 1923, constructing the puppets, writing the scripts from his experience. And he performed from 1923 until 1939. So almost 2 decades. He became the most famous puppeteer of New York. Some other puppeteers were closing and he was buying their puppets because his puppeteer theater was going so strong. The American puppeteers were very impressed with him. They went to see his performances. So he was primarily performing for the Italian American community, but his theater caught the attention of, let's say, the avant-garde of the American puppeteers in New York, Remo Buffano, Bill Baird, Tony Sarg, and they would be regulars at his theater. Therefore, there was this sense of exchange and appreciation of the drama on stage through the uh, choreography, but also the elaborate stories that were developed and enhanced through dialogue and through poetry. And some of the poetry goes back to the original Renaissance poems. So if I could mention that Agrippino, like all Sicilian puppeteers and Southern Italian puppeteers, used the same source, which was Giusto Lodovico's Storia dei Paladini di Francia, History of the Paladins of France. It was first published in 1858 to 1860 in almost 3,000 pages. And Giusto Lodovico did something monumental, which was to render into prose, but also to kind of mesh together about 20 separate Renaissance poems. And for Boiardo and Ariosto, which are the two poems at the center of this work, he used basically the entire poems. For some of the other poems, he used sections, but he managed to create a chronological line running throughout the Paladins of France that made sense out of these disparate epics that people had been reading, but that had not come into one continuous narrative until this point. So Agrippino Manteo had a copy, and the family still has the 1909 copy of the Paladini di Francia. But incredibly, he also went back to some of the Renaissance poems, and he grabbed poetry, inserted poetry into his theater from the poems when it was not present in Giusto Ludico's prose compilation. So he was really a playwright as well as a puppeteer.
So it must have been very fascinating to be able to study Matteo's handwritten scripts because, again, you made these great, I don't want to say annotation, but telling us about his talent, about almost as a playwright to kind of sew together elements that were not in the script. Any other elements that perhaps surprised you the most while studying his handwritten scripts that is worth mentioning?
Well, some of the poetry doesn't have any source, so it's possible that he wrote the verses himself. For example, the arrival of Angelica to Charlemagne's court at the opening of Boiardo's Orlando Innamorato is one of the most famous episodes in Italian literature, but also in puppet theater, because this princess from Cathay, so from East Asia, arrives unexpectedly amidst the court in Paris, where for once the Christians and the so-called Saracens, the Muslims from Spain, are gathered together at a banquet together because they're going to have a joust. So they're not in the middle of a war, they're in the middle of an international celebration and event. And she emerges on the scene, and everyone from Charlemagne to all of the knights, they just fall in love with her because of her beauty. And Agrippino, as well as other puppeteers, but Agrippino more extensively, quotes Angelica's lines from Boiardo's poem. But what Agrippino also does is he takes a line by Boiardo saying that Charlemagne didn't want to let Angelica go and kept talking to her. And he turns that into dialogue, and he gives Charlemagne his own set of ottava rima verses. And that is something that I've not found anywhere. So I do imagine that Agrippino invented for Charlemagne, I think it's 5.5 ottava rima stanzas in order to almost match Angelica's, I think, 6.5 ottava rima stanzas. And so he's a master of the scene.
Wow, that's indeed fantastic information. So the opera de Pupi is sometimes dismissed as a tourist folklore, or perhaps someone going to Sicily is recommended to go and see an opera de Pupi. So I would be interested to learn how you would respond to that. And or if someone is going to see an opera de Pupi, you would say, do this beforehand, almost like when people are going to the opera for the first time. Okay. You can enjoy, or you might not enjoy it because you haven't done a little bit of research or you haven't seen what the plot is. So a little bit would on your take about maybe the preparation to go and enjoy an opera de Pupi, so that it's not just a tourist experience. It's not just tourist folklore.
That's a very good point. When I arrived at Palermo, I remember seeing a poster that had the photograph of a puppet and underneath folklore. So selling puppet theater as folklore, which I mean, it's local color. I think maybe there's nothing wrong with the tourist office doing that, but at the same time, the stories themselves are important. You can enjoy a play without knowing the story ahead of time. And I remember going to a performance by Nino Cuticchio, the brother of Mimo Cuticchio, at his Teatro Ippogrifo in Palermo, where afterwards two young Italian women went behind the stage since he had left in suspense whether Orlando or Rinaldo would win Angelica in the upcoming joust. And they went behind stage and said, okay, can you just tell us, is it Orlando or Rinaldo who wins Angelica? And it was kind of funny because the Orlando Furioso is so famous that anyone who read it would know that neither of them win Angelica. She decides to fall in love, or she doesn't decide, but she falls in love with a foot soldier from North Africa named Medoro, and Orlando goes crazy. But they enjoyed it without knowing the story. And it built suspense for them to the point that they went behind stage to ask. So if you don't have any background, I think you can still enjoy the story. However, if you have the background, or how can you get the background, I think knowing a little bit about Boiardo or Ariosto would go a long way, because almost all of the performances that you will see in Palermo or Catania or Siracusa, there are a couple of wonderful companies in Siracusa, will be based either on Boiardo and Ariosto. And there is maybe three basic plays that 95% of the time you will see. The first is Orlando versus Rinaldo for the beautiful Angelica. And that puts the emphasis on the rivalry between the two cousins over a woman. And it's a very universal theme. And it I think, moves the attention away from the background of the Christian Saracen conflict that is a thread running through many of the stories. The other play that you will see often could be Astolfo going to the moon to get Orlando's wits in order to bring them back and cure Orlando. Orlando's descent into madness is another popular one. And the final one that you might see often is the Battle of Roncesvalles in Italian, which in puppet theater tradition follows Pulci's Morgante rather than the original Old French Chanson de Roland. Mm-hmm. And the big difference there is that Rinaldo, the rebel hero, the knight who was exiled by Charlemagne, who had suffered many injustices because of Gano's treachery, is brought back from his exile in order to avenge the Christians in Roncesvalles and to win the day. And that vindicates Rinaldo as the hero, not only of the Battle of Roncesvalles, but of basically of the cycle at large. So it becomes more about the justice and revindication of Rinaldo than about the battle between Christians and the Saracens who had invaded Spain.
Wonderful. So we're going to go into a very short break and we will be right back.
Do you love Italian food? Want to learn the secrets of homemade pasta, sauces, and traditional recipes, just like Nana used to make? At Mondo Italiano, our authentic Italian cooking classes bring the taste of Italy right to Pittsburgh. From fresh pasta to regional specialties, every class is a delicious journey through Italy's culinary traditions. Spots fill quickly, so reserve your seat today. Call us at 412-478-2681 or find us online. Mondo Italiano, where Italy comes alive one dish at a time.
Un caffè, per favore.
For more than 35 years, Pittsburgh has started its mornings with La Prima Espresso. From freshly roasted beans from around the world to the perfect espresso or cappuccino, every cup is crafted with care. Stop by and enjoy the warmth of our baristas and familiar faces, or bring the taste of Italy home. Order online today at laprima.com. La Prima Espresso, Pittsburgh's coffee. Well, we're back with Professor Joanne Cavallo. We are diving into the Sicilian puppet theater traditions. So a question comes to mind, the Fratelli Napoli, Coticchio family. Tell us a little bit about them, and if you do see any contemporary companies as a vital continuations of this tradition.
Thank you. I would love to. I went back to Sicily in 2024. I was presenting a volume at the Museo Pasqualino that they had published on world epic and puppet theater that had come out of the journal Equo, AOQU, I'm sorry. And I was giving a talk at the University of Palermo. But I took advantage of my time there to go to as many puppet plays as I could, because I wanted to understand how they were faring today, especially after the puppet theaters were closed during COVID-19. The government's very draconian measures really shut down everything. And from Facebook, it wasn't at all clear to me, or from their websites, it wasn't clear to me how they had recovered from this period of inactivity. And so I was absolutely thrilled and relieved to find that they were so vibrant. And what struck me most is how they were caring for the audience, for their public, in the sense of thinking creatively of plays that would speak to different publics. And I'll give you a few examples. In Palermo, Mimo Coticchio's theater was performing in the mornings for school children. Mm-hmm. And so I tagged along, and the play on Orlandino was about Orlando as a young boy and how he was poor, living in a cave with his mother and trying to stand up for himself and protect his mother. And it was very endearing to the children. Also, he was fighting against injustice even at that moment. For high school students, the Coticchio put on a puppet performance of the Iliad, which was very faithful to Homer's text, and that brought kind of very concisely together the main themes of the Greek epic. So it was almost being didactic. It was a way of bringing Greek theater to high school students through puppetry. And so that was very striking. Then there was Enzo Mancuso, who was performing in his theater, which is near the port. And a group of American tourists came to see a performance of Rinaldo and Orlando over Angelica. And the tour organizer had specifically requested that play because it's the one that is best known. And he didn't just perform it, he explained it ahead of time. He explained it in between each scene so that the audience would not simply see the choreography, but would follow the story. And so I think working with tourists, the puppeteers are doing also the work to, even if the audience is not prepared ahead of time, to prepare them. Another play that I went to see in Catania by the Fratelli Napoli turned out to be for locals. And that was a wonderful surprise. There was a lot of Sicilian because Peppinino, the farcical figure, was speaking in exclusively in Sicilian, as is the tradition. The knights, Bradamante was the protagonist, and the knights speak in standard Italian. But afterwards, the audience asking questions uh, were basically all locals. It was myself and a colleague from France who had heard about the performance and had traveled just in order to see it. I think we're the only non-Italians or the only, I wouldn't say we were tourists because we were, say, fans more than tourists, but we were the only, I say, non-outside, the only non-locals in the audience. And that reminded everyone, I think, that these stories, these puppet plays, maybe they would not be able to be performed consecutively for 300 or some nights as they used to be, but they still speak to audiences today. And then I think there's also the way that puppet theater, and I'm thinking of Mimo Cuticchio, reaches out to international audiences. And so he has used puppet theater to reimagine Macbeth, um, the Odyssey, 1001 Nights. I think it's his play is Aladino e tutti i colori, so Aladino in all colors. So there's a way that the puppet theater is it's you can find traditional plays, but you can also find ways in which the puppeteers are thinking on a big stage and in an international way.
And I think also the Napoli brothers, the Fratelli Napoli, are part of maybe two families that are the custodians, kind of the the Opera dei Pupi is a UNESCO, recognized art form. So now let's actually switch from the theater to the classroom, okay? And excuse me. And talking about how your students or American students react when they encounter Opera dei Pupi or the Maggio for the first time. And maybe I should have asked you this question at the very beginning. What was the attraction that led you to this art form that became the focus of your research? If there was a personal experience or as you were moving forward with your education that drawn you to l'Opera dei Pupi?
I think I had been interested in adaptation, how the text was adapted or could be adapted in popular theater. I was involved in an adaptation myself through a Columbia course. It was called the Italian Theater Practicum, and the Italian theater director Vittorio Capotorto put on plays with Columbia students and local actors in Italy during our Scandiano summer program. So it was the Orlando Innamorato in Commedia, which was a dramatization of the first part of Boiardo's poem. And it was followed by two additional plays to form a trilogy. So being involved in trying to kind of figure out how, in a practical way, how to transform words into action, into movement. When I did see the Sicilian puppet plays, I was impressed, amazed even as to how they managed to do that and to bring out the meaning of the poems in a way that spoke to me and I think spoke to the audience.
And so going back to your American students, their reaction when they encounter the Opera dei Pupi or the Maggio for the first time, what do you observe?
I think most of them are very interested. I had a student recently come to Italy 2 summers in a row to see the Maggio performances because of the course. And what I initially did was to include clips from either the Maggio or puppet theater as I was teaching courses on the epic. So I would teach one semester Boiardo's Orlando Inamorato, another semester Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, and we had the luxury of reading the entire poems, and I would bring in examples from the Maggio, from puppet theater, in order to look at how characters could be interpreted. For example, in the Orlando Furioso, there's a very superficial female character who is ready to leave her lover when he's killed. And in the Maggio, she becomes a very faithful and devoted beloved who laments over him. So it's a completely kind of rethinking of a character. And so as I would give these examples and I saw that there was student interest, I actually designed a course on the Italian Renaissance epic and popular performance traditions so that the entire course is built around episodes that are performed in these two traditions, and then I have been able to film so that we would have actual concrete material to discuss. And so we would go, say, episode week, every week would kind of be a different episode that we would concentrate on, and we would be able to compare the treatment of that episode in the original poem, in Giusto lo dico, in the epic Maggio, and in various puppet theater companies in order to see what was brought out and what was emphasized in each case. So comparing not only the text to a performance, but comparing performances amongst themselves brought out a lot of discussions. And all of this material I have put on the website Boiardo.
Yes, which I'm going to, because it was going to be indeed my next question. And thank you again for allowing me to use the background. But it seems to be a invaluable platform. Tell us a little bit how it is organized. If I see that there are students' projects, there is music, there are maps, puppet theater. Tell us a little bit what information people are going to find here. And this is not just for academic purposes, right? This is also like myself, I can go and read and browse and be taken to other articles that might be referenced there.
Absolutely. It's for students, it's for the general public, it's for anyone interested in the epics and in puppet theater. So really, I invite anyone to browse. If you go through the, say, on the menu authors, you can find, let's say, if you go to Boiardo, you can find divided by episode. So the arrival of Angelica and et cetera, various performances that I have filmed of these episodes. So it allows anyone to have fun seeing the performances and even to do research, to do a comparative study of them. For Ariosto, if you're able to get to Ariosto, I would go
Yes.
to Astolfo on the Moon because I had mentioned that earlier. Just to give a sense of so it's down a little ways. A lot of things happen before Astolfo goes to the moon. There, Astolfo
Here we
on the
go.
moon.
Let me see. Okay.
So if you click onto that, so you have there you go. That's
I'm going
the,
to let it play without having the audio interfering with our. I'm going to take the audio out so that you can still tell us a little bit about it.
okay, great. So this is the episode where I said that Astolfo reflects on humanity, and he is on the moon with Saint John and has arrived with the hippogriff. And uh, it allows viewers to see the scene very, very up close. There's another clip by the Fratelli Napoli, which uses, interestingly, a very similar setting, but has different dialogue. And then there's also a couple of songs, one by Vinicio Caposella, that he wrote himself, Ariosto Governatore, and another by the Italian rapper Giovanotti.
Oh, wow.
And there's also some art of Astolfo on the moon. So there's a lot of material that anyone browsing can work with either for pleasure or for research. So that's one of the ways that the material is divided according to author, and within author according to episode. Another way the material is divided is according to, say, Sicilian puppet theater. And in the drop-down menu for Sicilian puppet theater, you can find plays, and the plays are then divided into episodes so that you can find, say, what you're looking for. They're divided by interviews. So I originally was going to make a documentary on Sicilian puppet theater, the same way that I had made a documentary on the epic Maggio. And what I realized, I think if you go up to the puppet theater menu, and there you can see the list of things. Okay, so there's puppet scripts, puppet plays, interviews. If you go to, there's documentaries and films, and these were documentaries and films that I found available for free online. So I kind of put them all together on this page. So with the interviews, I was going to do a documentary, and then I decided that rather than select just a few quotes and a few clips into a 60 or so minute product, I would make all of the material available on the website. And so if you go to the menu with interviews, there are interviews with, say, all of the various puppeteers, and they are divided into segments. And I have a kind of a short description of what the puppeteer is going to say so that anyone scrolling can go immediately to what they're most interested in.
Do you see, without obviously making specific names, but do you see one of your students potentially be the writer of a new Maggio?
Oh, well, that's really funny because my daughter wrote a new Maggio when she sat in on my class. She was a student at Columbia University, and the year that I taught the course on Italian Renaissance epic and popular performance traditions, she was inspired to write a Maggio called La Rocca Crudele, which was the name of the kind of the Castle Cruel, the name of an episode from Boiardo's Orlando Innamorato. And she surprised me not by handing me the script, but by acting it out, actually singing it out. And not surprisingly, because now she's a film director, but at the time as a student, she put on different costumes. She went into the yard. She filmed herself singing the different parts. And then she sent me the file so that I could watch the the Maggio. And so that was many years ago. I think that may have been 2011.
Mhm.
And the story was one of the most dramatic stories of the Orlando Innamorato. A lot of horrible things happen, but in the end, there's justice. So it really fits the structure of the Maggio. And she had written about 70 or so stanzas in a quartina form for the Maggio, kind of the 4 verse, as opposed to the poem's 8 verse stanzas. And I was then inspired to write about another 70 or so stanzas to come up with a 140 stanza uh, play. And then I handed it over to a friend of mine who is a poet and a maggiorino, Luca Sillari, from the Maggio, the Compagnia Magistica Montecusna di Asta, from the province of Reggio Emilia. And he took some years, but in between his other work, he composed another, I don't know, maybe another 60 stanzas, and it became a full-fledged
Wow.
Maggio that debuted in 2000, I think 2023, the 50th anniversary of the company of Montecusna di Asta chose that Maggio as the play that they would feature for their 50th anniversary. So then I went with my daughter to the debut, and that's the first time that the student I had mentioned earlier came to see the Maggio with his
Mhm.
son, and then he returned the following year to see the Orlando Innamorato
Mhm.
performed by the same company.
Is this Maggio that your daughter's Maggio actually are also available for watching either onto your website on the Boiardo or on some other source?
It's on Boiardo. It absolutely is. So under the menu of the Maggio,
Mhm.
Epic Maggio, it has a list of plays. I think it has scripts, plays, and if you go under the plays, you will find it, and you can watch the entire Maggio.
Yes, I do see that. Well, you're giving me a lot of homework to do after this because I'm just going to make myself even more familiar with the website. But talking about, some many contemporary magi address historical trauma, injustice, or even current geopolitics. Is this a form of cultural resilience, in your opinion?
Yes, absolutely. And since you mentioned homework, there is the documentary that I made in 2003, Il Maggio Emiliano,
Hmm.
and I've put English subtitles for most of it if anyone is interested. That is also available for free on the website under the menu Il Maggio Epico. So it is documentary Maggio Emiliano, and there the various members of the community talk about different aspects of the Maggio. So I stay out of the picture behind the camera and I let them do all of the talking about how they view their own tradition and how they see it in terms of something that is still relevant today. And I think they are very eloquent, so I would invite you to watch. I think it's 90 minutes. And
Sure.
it's excerpts from the Maggio plays as well as very sincere, authentic, direct reflections by the Maggio, by members of the Maggio community about what that tradition means to them and how they work to keep it alive. And one way they do that is by teaching their children very young to be part of the tradition and to sing small parts. So when they grow up, it is already something that binds them to their families and to the community. So having large families and remaining very united and having the Maggio as their cultural touchstone is, I think, all very, very connected. And so I think some of them, they're still writing Maggi. And I think that's also important as well. It's not a tradition where they're only using scripts that were written centuries ago or decades ago. And in fact, the most recent study that I have done has been on Maggio authors, so poets in that area, in that region, who have written new Maggio plays from 1975 up to 2025. So over the last 50 years. And poets are still writing plays today. And I think that is the key. There are two keys. One is to teach the children to continue singing them because they will be the next generation to carry forward the tradition. But the other key is to write Maggio plays that speak to us, that are great, because they have to be great stories. Now, it's not enough that the tradition continues because it's a tradition, it's always been done. That's not a good enough reason. It has to continue because it is felt, because it conveys emotion, because it makes us think, because it says something that isn't said in any other way.
Indeed, I had a recent conversation with an artist from New York. Yes, you honor the tradition, but you evolve from it so that it speaks to any audience in the newer times. So one last question. Obviously, if there is anything else that we should be mentioning or adding, feel free also to add that. But after decades of research, what still moves you emotionally?
Oh, it all moves me. I'm surprised sometimes how enthusiastic I get and how passionate I feel either reading these poems, seeing these performances. Every time is almost like the first time. They are not old stories. They're universal stories. They're timeless stories. And there's always something when you go back and read the text, maybe any text, but some are richer than others. There are details that you may have missed previously, and then maybe just jump out at you. And so, for example, when I first started reading the poem of the Orlando Innamorato, I was interested in how it was creatively refashioning the previous epic stories, either the Greek and Latin medieval stories, and how Boiardo's heroes and characters and episodes were conveying meaning through a change or a reuse of earlier episodes. So, say, literary creative imitation. And then I became very interested in the geography of the poem because you have Cathay, you have Sericana, so you have Asia, you have the Middle East, you have Africa, you have Europe. How are these countries envisioned? And so then I started reading both historical accounts that Boiardo could have known, trying to uncover meaning through his use of geography. And so that's when I wrote The World Beyond Europe in the poems and the romance epics of Boiardo and Ariosto. And then I became interested in the folk traditions and the popular traditions. And so I started looking at the poems not as the end point of a long tradition of literary tradition, but as the beginning point in a long tradition of performance tradition moving to today. So there's always something new to both to find in the poems, but also new ways of approaching them that bring new questions and therefore new answers.
So, Professor Cavallo, thank you so much for also reminding us the epic is not simply a literary monument, it's a living voice. And with your research, your work, you build bridges between academia and community, between Italy, United States, the rest of the world, between text and performance. And it's been really a true privilege to have you with us today. But unfortunately, our time together is up and il Big Ben ha detto stop, and it's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. We want to thank you for tuning in into the program. And if you have any questions or comments, or if you have any topics you would like us to address, please contact us at the italianradiohour@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, subscribe to the Italian Radio Hour on YouTube or where you catch your favorite podcasts. And also, don't forget to share, because sharing is caring. And I would like to thank again my guest, Professor Joanne Cavallo. Our sponsor is Istituto Mondo Italiano and La Prima Espresso. Until next time, alla prossima. Ciao, ciao.